the cold architecture of the banking district in Paris taught me that financial giants will gladly rewrite the law if there is enough liquid currency to justify the crime. My name is Christian Vance and I am 35 years old, managing the international equity desk at the European branch of Fontaine Global. One foggy Monday evening, while conducting a deep security audit on our new renewable energy acquisitions, I discovered a massive hidden clearing channel. The encrypted transaction files revealed that over 110 million euros had been silently diverted into a shell corporation registered in the Isle of Man. My blood turned to ice when I ran the final digital forensics, because the authentication token used to validate the massive theft belonged to my senior partner and mentor, Adrien Fontaine. Adrien was a legendary figure in the French financial elite who had sponsored my career for 6 years and whom I respected as a second father. I knew that blowing the whistle on this scale of executive embezzlement would immediately ignite a lethal corporate war, but my professional integrity left me no room to retreat. I immediately cloned the illicit data ledger onto an encrypted external drive and prepared a confidential file for the European Securities and Markets Authority. The hook dropped at dawn when my primary security badge failed at the main elevator bank and 2 corporate security guards intercepted me in the lobby. Adrien stood near the grand glass entrance, holding a fabricated internal memo that accused me of selling proprietary client data to a rival firm in Zurich. The first massive twist hit me like a physical blow when the national police arrived with an official arrest warrant, showing that the Isle of Man Shell Company was fully registered under my personal residential address and social security number. I realized with absolute horror that Adrien had constructed a flawless legal trap to convert his top analyst into the perfect corporate scapegoat. As the officers moved to secure the handcuffs, the building fire suppression system suddenly activated, filling the entire marble lobby with a dense freezing mist. A hand gripped my jacket in the confusion, pulling me through a service corridor and down into the dark web of the Paris metro system before security could seal the perimeter. My rescuer was Natalie, a brilliant senior compliance lawyer who had been abruptly terminated by Fontaine Global the previous week for raising questions about the Isle of Man accounts. Natalie threw a burner phone into my lap and told me that our only chance to survive was to reach a secure data sanctuary in Brussels before the borders were completely locked down. We boarded an international cargo train using fake contractor credentials that Natalie had secured from her remaining allies inside the compliance department. As the train raced toward Belgium, the burner phone vibrated with a secure high-definition video call from an unlisted satellite network in Vienna. The screen activated to reveal the face of Lucas Fontaine, the exiled younger brother of Adrien, who had been forced out of the family dynasty 5 years ago. Lucas looked at me with a sharp, calculating smile and explained that the 110 million euros was as a down payment for a massive hostile takeover. The shocking twist came when Lucas revealed that Adrien was using the stolen funds to buy a controlling stake in a private German defense contractor that operated the satellite communication array for the entire European banking network. If Adrien finalized the purchase during the upcoming Emergency Economic Summit in Luxembourg, he would possess the absolute power to blind the central bank and delete any corporate audit trail. Lucas offered to provide the decryption protocols for Adrien's offshore network if we agreed to help him seize control of the Fontaine board of directors during the summit. We needed to capture a physical hardware token containing the master encryption keys, which was currently locked inside a security safe aboard Adrien's private luxury train traveling from Paris to Berlin. Just as I accepted the high-stakes alliance, the cargo train slammed on its emergency brakes, and the metal side doors were blown open by a tactical strike team hired by the Fontaine family to terminate us on sight. The blast from the explosive charges threw Natalie and me to the floor of the cargo car as the tactical team flooded the tight space with blinding laser sights. Christian did not hesitate, grabbing Natalie's arm and pulling her through the ruptured metal side panel into the deep snow beside the tracks. We scrambled down a steep ravine into the dense Ardennes forest, the sound of automatic gunfire shredding the branches above our heads. Natalie pulled out a small tactical transmitter, hacking the local cellular tower to loop the mercenaries' tracking signals and buy us 10 minutes of total invisibility. The hook arrived when we reached a deserted logging road and found a high-speed luxury sedan waiting with its hazard lights flashing. Sitting in the driver's seat was none other than Julianne, Adrian's top executive secretary, who calmly told us to get in if we wanted to survive the night. Julianne tore down the highway toward the German border, her dashboard monitors scanning for local federal police interceptors. I watched her through the rearview mirror, knowing she had been Adrian's most trusted shadow and possessed the biometric codes for his entire empire. The first massive twist occurred when Julianne handed me an encrypted tablet showing a live feed of my sister's apartment in Munich being raided by private security teams. Julianne confessed that she was not helping us out of loyalty, but because Adrian had recently discovered she was secretly feeding data to the Ministry of Justice. Adrian had already initiated a termination protocol against her, meaning Julianne was next on the elimination list, and her only option was to use my financial codes to destroy the Fontaine dynasty before they could silence her forever. We reached the secluded rail yard near Cologne just as Adrian's private luxury train, the Imperial Fleet, was preparing to depart for the Berlin terminal. The entire station was locked down by private maritime security contractors, making entry through the passenger platforms an absolute impossibility without an electronic biometric clearance. Julianne used her master administrative override to trigger a false mechanical failure in the train's cooling system, forcing the security crew to evacuate the main engine carriage. Natalie and I used the chaos to breach the rear observation car, moving silently through the mahogany corridors toward Adrian's personal mobile office. The next major hook dropped when we finally cracked the electronic safe inside his desk and found the velvet compartment completely empty. I stared at the empty safe while the heavy steel doors of the mobile office suddenly slammed shut, trapping us inside the reinforced observation car. The massive digital display on the wall flickered to life, revealing the cold, triumphant face of Adrian sitting in a private suite at the European Parliament building in Brussels. Adrian smiled, informing us that the hardware token was already inside a diplomatic pouch on its way to the Luxembourg summit via a heavily armed convoy. The major twist hit me like a physical blow when Natalie's phone buzzed with a bank notification showing that her frozen accounts had just been credited with 20 million euros from Fontaine Global. Natalie looked at me with a cold, expressionless smile, stepped through a hidden pneumatic escape panel in the wall, and left me alone as the security teams began breaching the reinforced doors. Christian used a heavy fire extinguisher to shatter the glass of the emergency exit window, dragging himself and a semi-conscious Julianne onto the gravel tracks just as the guards opened fire. We tumbled down the concrete embankment into the dark waters of the Rhine River, swimming beneath the industrial shipping barges to evade the searchlights. We crawled onto a deserted dock, our bodies freezing and our resources completely depleted, but our determination to expose the fraud was stronger than ever. We knew the final confrontation would take place in Luxembourg in less than 4 hours, where the emergency summit was scheduled to finalize the digital banking takeover. Lucas Fontaine was already waiting for us at a private airstrip near Bonn, holding a secondary virus that could intercept the diplomatic pouch data if we could get close enough to the convoy. The high-speed pursuit across the German border ended at a secluded hangar where Lucas Fontaine was waiting next to a twin-engine military-grade helicopter. Lucas did not waste a single second, shoving us into the tactical cabin as the rotors began to roar, lifting us into the gray morning sky. He connected his quantum terminal to the European satellite array, tracking the real-time GPS coordinates of the armored convoy moving through the hills of Luxembourg. The hook arrived when Lucas showed us that Natalie had not just betrayed us for 20 million euros, but was actually the biological daughter of the German billionaire who was funding Adrian's entire satellite coup. This meant the betrayal on the luxury train was a choreographed corporate performance designed to eliminate any independent auditors who could expose the network to the central bank. The helicopter skimmed the treetops of the dense forest, avoiding international aviation radar by maintaining a dangerous altitude just above the canopy. As we closed in on the Luxembourg border, Julian noticed 3 black armored transport units moving in a tight defensive diamond formation on the highway below. Lucas explained that the lead transport vehicle contained the diplomatic pouch with the physical hardware token required to validate the €110 million transfer. The first major twist of the morning occurred when a sudden localized electromagnetic pulse disabled our helicopter's main engines, causing the control panels to flash red before dying completely. Adrian had anticipated a tactical aerial interception and had equipped his convoy with electronic warfare systems that were now pulling our aircraft into a fatal tailspin. The pilot managed to execute a hard autorotation landing in a mud field next to the highway, the heavy impact snapping the helicopter's main rotor assembly. Julian and I broke through the fractured windshield, dragging Lucas into the high brush just as the aircraft fuel lines exploded into a massive tower of black smoke. We utilized the thick smoke as a tactical screen, sprinting toward the highway before the armored convoy security teams could assess the crash site. I noticed the driver of the secondary armored vehicle had stepped out to inspect the explosion, leaving his tactical cabin door completely unsecured with the engine running. I did not hesitate, leaping into the armored driver's seat while Julian locked Lucas into the reinforced passenger hold behind me. I slammed the armored vehicle into gear, ramming the lead transport car at maximum velocity and forcing it through the concrete guardrail into a shallow ravine. The violent impact triggered the lead vehicle's automated safety systems, popping the rear cargo hatches open and sending the silver diplomatic pouch sliding across the wet asphalt. Julian leaned out of the side portal, using a mechanical retrieval tool to snatch the pouch just as the mercenary forces opened fire with automatic weapons against our armored glass. I shifted into overdrive, flooring the accelerator and racing toward the city center of Luxembourg, where the international summit was already underway. The next hook dropped when we unsealed the diplomatic pouch and discovered that the hardware token was flashing a digital self-destruct sequence with exactly 15 minutes remaining. Julianne used her technical knowledge of Fontaine security systems to freeze the self-destruct counter at 45 seconds, buying us just enough time to breach the convention center. The entire European banking district was gridlocked by media crews and diplomatic escorts, the glass towers glowing under the overcast sky. We abandoned the scarred armored vehicle in the VIP parking garage, entering the main facility through a restricted basement utility tunnel, while wearing the security uniforms from the convoy. The major twist hit us when we stepped into the Grand Gallery and saw Adrian already standing at the center podium, delivering his presentation on the new satellite banking network to hundreds of global investors. Sitting directly behind him in the front row of the executive board was Natalie, who was currently holding the master tablet that was receiving the final authorization layers of our stolen funds. I walked directly down the center aisle of the Grand Gallery, discarding my security visor and holding the silver hardware token high above my head for the cameras to broadcast. The entire auditorium fell into an absolute silence as Adrian stopped speaking mid-sentence, his face turning from absolute confidence to frozen terror within a fraction of a second. I shouted into the main television pool microphone that the entire satellite banking network was a fraudulent operation funded by stolen reserves from the Isle of Man clearing channel. The hook dropped when Natalie calmly stood up, tapped her master tablet twice, and activated the facility's high-security lockdown protocol, causing heavy steel shutters to seal every entrance and exit. She smiled at the panicked investors, announcing that the local police response had been delayed by a prepaid corporate contract and no one would leave the room until the transfer completed. The crowd of international investors erupted into panic as 15 armed private contractors entered from the stage wings, their automatic weapons pointed directly at the assembly. Adrian demanded that I surrender the hardware token immediately, stating that if I refused, his legal team would execute a global liquidation order that would destroy the savings of millions of European citizens. The massive twist occurred when Lucas Fontaine stepped onto the main stage from the rear curtains, holding a satellite uplink connected directly to the governors of the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. Lucas revealed that he had used the last 45 seconds of the frozen countdown to execute an emergency administrative freeze, completely locking Fontaine Global out of the continental clearing grid. The massive digital displays behind Adrian suddenly glitched, replacing his corporate presentation with a live broadcast of federal agents, raiding the Fontaine headquarters back in Paris. Every single one of Adrian's hidden offshore accounts was displayed on national television in real time, exposing his global network of bribes and political manipulation to the entire world. The armed contractors realized their employer assets were permanently frozen and they would never receive their multi-million euro operational fees, so they slowly lowered their weapons and retreated through the basement tunnels. Adrian collapsed into his chair, his multi-billion-dollar dynasty ruined in front of the global financial elite, while the international anti-fraud units finally breached the main doors to place him under arrest. Natalie tried to lose herself in the chaotic crowd of investors, but Julianne blocked her path with a federal detention warrant signed by the European Supreme Court. As the authorities led Adrian and Natalie away in handcuffs, Lucas turned to me with a cold, calculating expression that perfectly matched his brother's old style. He thanked me for my incredible service to the Fontaine family, but then presented me with a termination agreement that stripped me of my seniority and banished me from the financial sector entirely. The ultimate twist arrived when I examined the fine print of the agreement and realized that Lucas had used the administrative freeze to buy up all the distressed shares himself, turning him into the new absolute ruler of Fontaine Global. I looked at Lucas and smiled, refusing to sign the contract, because I had anticipated his betrayal from the moment we boarded his military helicopter in Bonn. Before stepping into the Grand Gallery, Julianne and I had rewritten the core protocol of the hardware token to ensure the 110 million euros never returned to the Fontaine accounts. The entire fortune had been permanently routed into an independent trust fund managed by the original green energy engineers whom Adrian had defrauded 6 years ago. I walked out of the Luxembourg Convention Center into the fresh evening air, a free man with an unburdened conscience, knowing that while I no longer held a corporate title, I had executed the most perfect corporate justice in the history of the continent. The temporary peace vanished by Wednesday morning as the sudden collapse of Fontaine Global created a massive liquidity vacuum that threatened to destabilize the entire French banking sector. I was sitting in a quiet bistro in Brussels when an unmarked armored limousine pulled up to the curb and 2 federal agents requested my immediate assistance. They escorted me to the maximum security wing of the European Commission, where a senior director named Eleanor Vance was waiting for me inside a soundproof tactical briefing room. Eleanor explained that while I had secured the green energy funds, an anonymous financial entity based in Zurich was currently buying up the compromised debt of our partner banks to gain total control over the infrastructure. The hook arrived when she revealed that this entity was utilizing a highly advanced automated trading algorithm to force the banks into a state of artificial bankruptcy before Friday morning. Eleanor offered me a position as a chief federal investigator with diplomatic immunity, tasking me with tracking down the master servers of the Zurich entity before the market opening. She provided me with a secure quantum terminal that had direct entry into the encrypted transaction backbones of the Swiss interbank clearing system. The first massive twist of the afternoon occurred when I logged into the network and analyzed the structural lines of the automated trading algorithm. The master source code was not the product of a foreign state or a traditional hedge fund, but was an identical copy of a risk optimization program I had written myself during my early years at Fontaine Global. Someone had breached my private server years ago and was now using my own design to systematically dismantle the European financial architecture. I realized with absolute certainty that only one person possessed the access codes to steal that specific software, my former childhood friend David, who had supposedly perished in a Swiss Alpine accident 2 years ago. Julianne and I immediately caught an express train to Zurich, tracking the active transmission source of the algorithmic trades to a subterranean facility beneath an old watch factory near the lake. We breached the underground complex using Julianne's security overrides, navigating through rows of humming liquid-cooled server arrays that were generating an immense amount of thermal energy. The hook dropped when we reached the central monitoring hub and found David alive, sitting in front of a wall of glowing data displays, his face scarred but his smile as sharp as ever. David explained that he had simulated his own passing to escape Adrienne's surveillance, and had been operating from the shadows to execute his ultimate retaliation against the banking elite. He had used my risk algorithm to map the exact structural vulnerabilities of the market, allowing him to siphon billions from the collapsing Fontaine empire without triggering any regulatory alarms. The massive twist arrived when David activated a secondary monitor, showing a live feed of Elinor's federal office in Brussels, revealing that she was his primary partner in this global conspiracy. Elinor had not hired me to stop the entity. She had used my federal investigation as a legal screen to locate the remaining central bank security blocks so David could completely delete them before the Friday deadline. David offered me an equal share of the new digital financial system they were creating, stating that with my risk management and his infrastructure control, we could dictate the economic policy of Europe. If I refused, Elinor would instantly activate a fabricated treason file that would frame me for the entire banking collapse, ensuring I would spend the rest of my life in a federal penitentiary. I looked at Julianne, who had silently connected her portable tracking drive to the main server framework, while David was busy explaining his grand design for corporate dominance. I looked David straight in the eyes and told him that his deployment of my algorithm had a fundamental vulnerability that he had completely overlooked because he forgot who designed the security architecture. Before David could reach for his security alarm, Julianne pressed the execution sequence on her portable drive, injecting a destructive deletion worm directly into the heart of the master processor array. The displays across the wall began to shatter with error messages, the clean lines of financial transactions turning into chaotic static as the system began to wipe its own core database. David lunged forward in absolute rage, but I wrestled him to the floor, pinning him down before he could access the emergency hardware override switch on his desk. The hook came when the heavy pneumatic security doors of the hub suddenly slammed shut and locked, trapping us all inside while the automated fire suppression system began to flood the sealed room with carbon dioxide. Elinor had been monitoring the server status from Brussels, and the moment she detected the deletion worm, she activated the facility cleanup protocol to eliminate all remaining witnesses. The oxygen levels inside the central hub plummeted rapidly, making it almost impossible to breathe or maintain focus, while the emergency sirens wailed through the smoke. Julianne managed to bypass the electronic lock panel, using a high-voltage probe from her gear, creating a temporary circuit short that forced the pneumatic doors to slide open by a few inches. We dragged ourselves through the narrow opening into the main corridor, leaving a desperate David behind as he scrambled to save his burning storage drives from the overheating server racks. We escaped the subterranean facility just as the main electrical transformers exploded, sending a massive shockwave through the quiet streets of Zurich. The twist occurred when my burner phone received a direct message from Eleanor, stating that the false treason files had already been delivered to Interpol and our faces were now on every international border monitor. We knew remaining in Switzerland was a death sentence, so we used a high-powered motorboat to cross Lake Zurich under the cover of a sudden storm, heading toward the Austrian border. Julianne contacted an underground network of independent technical contractors who provided us with an unmarked transport van filled with obsolete industrial equipment to mask our passage through the checkpoints. As we drove through the freezing mountain passes, I opened the quantum terminal, which had managed to salvage a single data fragment from David's master server before the explosion. The hook dropped when I decrypted the fragment and discovered that Eleanor was not the true architect of this conspiracy, but was acting on direct orders from a hidden committee inside the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. This hidden committee was planning to use the artificial banking collapse to force the entire European continent into a centralized digital currency network that they would control absolutely from behind closed doors. The upcoming Friday market opening was their absolute deadline, meaning we had less than 24 hours to expose the Basel Committee before the economic sovereignty of the continent was permanently lost. We arrived in Basel early Thursday morning, blending into the sea of corporate executives walking through the modern financial district where the high-security tower stood. Julianne managed to tap into the tower's main fiber optic trunk line, providing us with a live audio feed of the executive boardroom where the committee was currently finalizing their launch protocol. The major twist of the morning hit me like a physical blow when we heard the voice of the committee chairman, which belonged exclusively to my billionaire father, who had supposedly lost everything during the original Fontaine global collapse. My father had sacrificed Adrian, his own partners, and his legacy as a grand opening gambit to position himself at the head of this new global banking authority, proving his greed had no limits. He was currently instructing Eleanor to finalize the market crash sequence, completely indifferent to the fact that his actions would ruin the financial futures of millions of families across the continent. I felt a cold, unyielding rage replace my physical exhaustion, realizing that the final adversary in this entire corporate nightmare was the very man who had given me my name. Julianne and Christian spent the next 10 hours in the hidden tram depot safe house, using the quantum terminal's processing power to build a high-frequency decryption weapon that could pierce the Basel Tower's master server vault. We knew physical entry into the skyscraper was impossible due to the advanced facial recognition scanners and armed security teams patrolling every floor. Our only option was to broadcast our decryption worm directly into the bank's satellite uplink dish during the final committee session on Thursday night. We climbed to the roof of an adjacent commercial building in the freezing rain, calibrating a directional microwave antenna to target the bank primary receiver across the street. The hook dropped when the antenna secured a stable connection and my laptop began downloading the committee private ledger files, exposing every bribe paid to Eleanor and the directors. Just as the download progress reached 90%, the heavy metal roof door behind us was kicked open by a tactical assault team wearing unmarked black combat armor and holding silenced weapons. The leader of the team stepped forward, raising his ballistic visor to reveal Lucas Fontaine, who had traded his designer corporate suit for tactical gear to finish his family dirty work personally. Lucas smiled, informing us that my father had offered him the position of global chief executive of the new digital currency network if he eliminated us tonight. The massive twist occurred when Christian pulled an emergency signal flare from his jacket and fired it directly into the bank communication dish across the street, creating a massive electrical explosion that lit up the Basel sky. The sudden blast overloaded the regional relay array, short-circuiting Lucas' tactical headsets and giving us the perfect moment to dive down the building fire escape into the dark streets below. We ran through the wet alleys of Basel, the sound of Lucas' mercenaries echoing behind us, as they pursued us with relentless corporate efficiency. We managed to reach a secondary safe house inside an old industrial warehouse, where the quantum laptop finished compiling the stolen committee data, despite the damage to our antenna network. I now possessed the absolute proof of my father's global conspiracy, Eleanor's federal corruption, and Lucas' involvement in the satellite sabotage. The hook arrived when my terminal screen suddenly flashed an incoming priority transmission from the director of the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C., who had been secretly monitoring our progress through a secure back channel. The director informed us that my father had already initiated the market crash sequence, 12 hours ahead of schedule, meaning the European markets would collapse in exactly 60 minutes. The major twist of the night hit me when the IMF director revealed that Eleanor had just authorized an elite federal strike team to breach our safe house and destroy the quantum laptop before we could broadcast the evidence. I realized that running away was no longer an option, so I decided to play the ultimate high-stakes corporate card by broadcasting the entire database directly to every major media outlet in the world simultaneously. Julianne used her rogue engineering skills to hijack the local television and radio frequencies across the entire European continent, replacing the standard programming with the face of my father negotiating the artificial market crash. Within minutes, the live broadcast went viral on social media, triggering an immediate and unprecedented public uprising against the Basel Banking Committee. The federal strike team arrived at our safe house just as the broadcast concluded, but instead of arresting us, their commanding officer received a direct order from the Prime Minister office to stand down immediately. The public outrage had forced the European governments to launch an emergency independent investigation, stripping Eleanor of her federal authority and freezing the assets of every director on the Basel Committee. My father's grand gambit had collapsed in a single hour of total media exposure, his dream of a unified digital currency empire completely ruined by the very son he had tried to eliminate. Lucas Fontaine was captured by local police while trying to flee across the German border in a stolen vehicle, ending his short-lived corporate career in total disgrace. Eleanor Vance was arrested at her luxurious desk in Brussels by a team of international prosecutors, her career over and her diplomatic immunity permanently revoked by the European Parliament. David managed to disappear into the Swiss mountains once again, before the authorities could track his location, leaving behind an empty server room and a mysterious encrypted message on my personal terminal. The note simply said that a true master of risk never relies on a single algorithm, suggesting that he had already moved a substantial portion of the stolen funds into a completely untraceable offshore network. I walked out of the tram depot's safe house into the calm morning light, knowing that while the immediate economic crisis had been averted, the corporate underworld would always find a way to rebuild its shadow networks. 3 weeks later, I was formally invited to the Grand Assembly Hall of the European Parliament in Strasbourg, where the remaining heads of state were gathering to rebuild the financial regulatory framework of the continent. The President of the Commission stepped forward, presenting me with the highest civilian honor for corporate integrity and offering me the position of chairman of the new European Financial Stability Board. This role would give me the ultimate authority to monitor, audit, and regulate every single banking conglomerate operating from Madrid to Berlin, ensuring that a conspiracy like my father's could never happen again. I looked out at the massive applause from the international audience, feeling a sense of deep accomplishment, but the hook dropped when my assistant handed me an urgent red folder that had just arrived from the Zurich Central Archive. Inside the red folder was a newly filed corporate registration document showing that a massive international conglomerate named Vance Global Trust had just been established in London. The master shareholder list was completely hidden behind a complex wall of anonymous trust funds, but the digital signature used to authorize the multi-billion euro capitalization was unmistakably my father's private encryption key. The shocking twist was that my father had managed to leverage his hidden assets to negotiate a secret plea deal with the British authorities, allowing him to avoid prison by turning over his remaining committee partners while keeping his secret wealth intact. He was no longer in a federal cell, but was currently sitting in a private penthouse in Mayfair, preparing to launch a hostile takeover of the very stability board that I had just been hired to lead. I realized in that definitive moment that the corporate jungle never truly sleeps, and that biological bloodlines would always find a way to return to the battlefield of immense and power. Julianne and Christian stood beside me as I took the oath of office, their expressions hardening into total resolve as they saw the data inside the red folder. We had won the battle for Frankfurt, Zurich, and Basel, but the true war for the financial soul of the Vance dynasty was only just beginning on a much larger global stage. I walked to the central podium of the Parliament Hall, looking directly into the main television camera, knowing that my father was watching the live broadcast from his luxury penthouse in London. I delivered my inaugural speech with absolute confidence, announcing an immediate, comprehensive forensic audit of every single anonymous trust fund operating within the United Kingdom, effectively declaring an all-out corporate war on my father's new empire before he'd even launch his first hostile takeover attempt. As the cameras flashed and the audience cheered, my phone buzzed with a final text message from an unlisted number containing a real-time video of Natalie standing on a private yacht in Greece, holding a glass of champagne and smiling as she watched my speech on a digital screen, proving that in this high-stakes game of corporate drama, the players might change their locations, but the pursuit of total dominance never truly ends.